All right, we begin here with our big story, though. That major development now in the Middle East. Hamas saying it has accepted a proposal regarding a ceasefire agreement. This coming months after stalemated negotiations to stop the fighting in Gaza and release remaining Israeli hostages being held there. Few specifics have been provided on this deal that Hamas has agreed to. So at this moment, it's unclear what these terms are. But a senior official in Israel with knowledge of these negotiations says it is not the same proposal that was under discussion. Israel has confirmed that it has received Hamas's response on the ceasefire proposal, saying it will send working-level negotiators to discuss that plan. Of course, this is the plan that the terror group agreed to. Now, the country's war cabinet meeting today, Israeli Minister Benny Gantz saying significant gaps remain. This is all happening as the IDF continues to prepare for an apparent invasion in Rafah. This is Gaza's southernmost city, where more than 1 million Palestinian refugees are seeking safety away from the war. President Biden speaking with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier today, where he again reiterated America's opposition to that invasion, urging restraint. The IDF dropping flyers in Rafah, asking civilians to evacuate, as the Pentagon says it still hasn't seen a plan from Israel on how its military plans to protect the innocent civilians caught in the middle. So joining us now is our ABC News national security and defense analyst, Mick Mulroy. Mick, thank you for being here with us today. A lot to go over, too. So while we don't have the exact terms of this deal that Hamas is now saying they agree to, again, I want to point out that a member of the Israeli war cabinet says there's significant gaps in this. And a reminder to our viewers that, Secretary of State Antony Blinken called Israel's agreement, said they took, extraordinary measures to make an agreement. Where do you think these gaps are now?
Okay, it's unclear, because if they accepted the agreement, it would have been the agreement that if Israel offered. If they accept different terms, that's not accepting the agreement. That's a counteroffer. And it's really up to Israel to then to look at it and determine whether they want to accept it, and then they would actually have an agreement. If that's the case, we have a lot left to do. And I think, as you pointed out, the Israelis are moving toward this actual military offensive into Rafah. It is very clear. They've already given indications to different sections of Rafah to start moving to the coast, to what they designated as the safe haven. So this has come down to what this agreement is and what it isn't. So hopefully we'll find out either whether Hamas accepted the actual offer, or if they did not, whether Israel will accept the counteroffer.
All right, so let's talk about the timing of this a little bit, of this announcement by Hamas, right? Hamas makes this agreement essentially within hours of Israel ordering the evacuations of those eastern areas of Rafah.
That's right. Some would say this is basically an attempt to make up time, basically to say they accepted an agreement, which they did not, and to try to continue these negotiations because they can see that Israel's getting very close. The two major divisions they expect to use this are at the assembly area and getting prepared to go in. And it's clear that this is now going ahead if they don't come up with a ceasefire. So that some would say that is what they did to try to delay this actual offensive.
Mick, there's a former IDF spokesperson, and he says this Hamas approval looks like textbook deception. Do you agree with that assessment?
No, that's the concern, Kana, is that they didn't accept the agreement. They came up with different, which even in basic contract law means you reject the agreement if you have a counteroffer. And so negotiations is the same thing. So they might be saying this to try to gain some kind of idea that this is stopped. Because that would be the point of agreeing to a ceasefire. But it doesn't seem to be the case. And that's why I think the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt isn't really commenting on this, because they have to wait to see what Israel is going to do, whether they're going to look at this as restarting the negotiations, which is likely not going to be favorable and going to lead to an offensive in Rafah, or whether they are okay with this deviation and whether they accept it. It sounds like they are not.
Yeah, a lot to be gleaned here, I think, in the next few hours. Also, though, Mick, as we know, ABC News has this reporting right now that IDF has jets right now targeting these eastern areas of Rafah. These are the areas where they dropped the leaflets and told people to evacuate. So what does that signal to you about both a full-on Rafah invasion, but then also a possible ceasefire deal if this is happening?
So by all estimations, it'll take 10 days to 12 days to move this population, if it's willing, to the coast. After that, you'll see this preparatory fire, both airstrikes and then artillery, trying to clear the way for these ground invasions. The U.S. would like to see a limited ground invasion where intel finds the enemy in reconnaissance, and then the main effort goes straight to the enemy. What it looks like Israel plans to do is what it did in Khan Yunis, which is basically in mass. So a block assault, which could lead to significant civilian casualties if they stay behind, and destruction. That is where I think the difference, even though the U.S. has been a little coy when it comes to what they're talking about, that is what I think the difference right now is between the U.S. View of this and the way the Israelis seem to be going forward.
All right, Mick Mulroy, thank you so much for your assessment of all of this. We appreciate your time. I'm going to bring our big story now to our panel. So joining us today is our ABC News contributor and op-ed columnist for the Los Angeles Times, LZ Granderson, Democratic strategist and former Assistant Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security under the Biden administration, Marcia Espinoza, ABC News political contributor and senior editor for The Dispatch, Sarah Isker, and ABC News contributor and Sirius XM radio host, Mike Muse. Thank you all so much for being here with us. So I know you just listened to our conversation there. And so, LZ, I'm hoping that you can jump in here and give us your assessment of how you see potentially what's playing out right now, where Mick just said it might take 10 to 12 days to get these people out of the area in near Rafah if the IDF does plan to go in. And at the meantime, he said Hamas is essentially kind of trying to make up time here with this so-called agreement.
Well, obviously I'm not a foreign policy expert, but I am a domestic policy expert, and I can tell you how that's going to play out right here in the United States. And we've already gotten a taste of that with just the college campuses and the eruption over the way that the United States have been somewhat complicit in the way that Israel has been handling this war with Hamas. And my fear is, as I'm sure many on the panel share my concerns, is that given the fact that the Pentagon has already said that there is no feasible plan to make sure that civilians are safeguarded, what exactly is this going to look like if Israel goes through in terms of domestic politics, in terms of how this impacts the Biden administration, as well as the rhetoric that comes out of Congress in terms of how we continue to support Israel, because they have been getting more and more away from the moral high ground the longer this war goes on.
And Marcia, to you, I mean, what could we expect here from the Biden administration if Israel does move forward with an invasion of Rafah?
Well, the White House has said they're in a really critical stage right now. We're clearly very sensitive. So the worst thing that they can do is start speculating about what's in it. But I think, what they've shown is that President Biden, Secretary Blinken, and CIA Director Bill Burns have all been working behind the scenes to get to the ultimate goal, which is to get these hostages out, to get a ceasefire, and to increase humanitarian assistance. So too early to tell, but continue to watch all of this.
As we watch it all play out, I mean, Sarah, even if Israel does agree to a temporary ceasefire, I mean, does this really bring the war to an end here? The region continues to be unstable because Hamas is in power.
That's right. I haven't heard anyone tell me how this is actually going to end with Hamas in power, whose stated mission is the eradication of Israel and the extermination of Jews. So I don't know how Israel can continue when Hamas has said their plan is to, commit October 7th atrocities again and again and again. So whether there's a temporary ceasefire or not, this war will have to continue until Hamas is no longer in power. And the sooner that Americans who want to actually see peace in the region get on board with not backing Hamas, saying they must surrender and be out of power in that area, the sooner we will actually get towards a lasting peace.
And in terms of that as well, the perception of this war, Mike, it is something that we've been talking about a lot here for the last 7 months or so. And it's especially poignant in this moment when you hear Mick and others talk about this agreement that we're talking about today with Hamas is essentially deception.
That's a really great point that you raise. In particular, the way that is being positioned is that Hamas will have the upper hand in controlling the way these negotiations go. And you never want to have a terrorist organization being able to dictate the demands on you, and in particular when they're holding your countrymen hostage with that one. What I found interesting, though, was the relationship that some of the Gulf states are playing in this negotiations. Kana, we talked ultimately on this program so many times before about the importance of having the Gulf states step up to the plate, participate and help with this negotiations. And so in this negotiations, I hope that those two countries will play a pivotal role ensuring that the leverage isn't with Hamas, but with them as a neutral moderator between Hamas and Israel, so that the terms are fair and not deceptive.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, too. We also heard Mick Mulroy say it's sort of interesting that we haven't heard a comment yet from Egypt or from Qatar, and we may well hear from them in the coming days. LZ, Marcia, Sarah, Mike, thank you so much. We appreciate it.